All right, folks, this is Mr. Foreman making a video showing you what I think is the best way to make a histogram in Google Sheets. So we are going to be looking at our M&M candy data that we got, the quantity of each color of candy in each pack. We've already calculated the mean, median, mode, and standard deviation, and we're going to use these to create a histogram. The first thing I want to show you actually really quick though is you'll notice though when I scroll right and left, on the left side, this whole yellow, red, blue is actually staying there. It's because I did this thing called freeze panes, which is kind of nice. If you don't know how to do that, I can go to the pane I want to freeze, so like trial number, and click view and then freeze. And then I could say, this would be up to column A, and then that means column A is frozen. So when I scroll to the right, I can still see column A. It's just a nice little hack if you didn't know that. So, well, the first thing I'm going to show you is that if I click and drag all my yellow data, so I've selected everything up to P15 from B15, so I'm looking at all the yellow data. Sheets does have a default histogram, so I can go Insert, Chart, and it will automatically assume I want some kind of line graph or column graph, but I can see that they have a histogram. But my issue with the Sheets histograms is that they will give you default bin sizes. So it looks like here the bin is exactly 1.5 because we go from 2 to 3.5, 3.5 to 5. And that is not really a meaningful size based on our data. It's just based on some calculation that Sheets is doing. They're saying, oh, we want it to be 1.5. And if you go over here to customize, there is a customized histogram, and you can change the bucket size, but you only get these options, 1, 2, 5, 10, 25, 50, and then they're auto-generated. You can't set your own, which is, I think, kind of annoying. So I'm going to leave this one here as an example of, well, this is, the super quick, I guess, kind of histogram that Sheets is going to make for you. Okay. Now I'm going to show you the way that we can make a histogram that I think is a little more representative of our data. So I'm going to go all over here to the right, and I'm going to make sure I can see our mean, median, mode, and standard deviation. And I'm going to work right here, and I'll show you why. So I'm going to call this column yellow, and then I'm going to label this bin and label this frequency. And hopefully these labels are going to make sense once I actually get going. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to define my bins, and my bins I'm actually going to base off of my standard deviation and my mean. And so again, I think once I get going, you're going to see what I'm doing a little more clearly. So I'm going to type equals to tell Excel or Sheets that I'm doing a function. And then I'm going to say mean. So I'm going to click on the cell with mean, R3, minus 3 times the standard deviation. And so what this is doing, what this calculation is actually doing, is it's taking the mean and it's subtracting the standard deviation 3 times. I'm literally, putting into a calculator 4 minus 3 times 1.85, and that value is negative 1.55. So negative 1.55 is what is 3 standard deviations below the mean for yellow. I'm going to keep doing that for yellow, so equals the mean minus 2 standard deviations equals the mean minus 1 standard deviation equals the mean plus 1 standard deviation equals the mean plus 2 standard deviations and equals the mean plus 3 standard deviation. Oops. 3 times, so you gotta make sure you're typing what you're meaning. So the mean plus 3 times the standard deviation. So here what I'm setting up are, these are going to be my bin widths that I want. And these bin widths are based off the standard deviation. So an actual meaningful value in our data, not this just 1.5 that Sheets is spitting out. Then Sheets has this nice function called frequency. So if I type equals frequency, parentheses. So first, see it highlights, it tells me I'm looking for data. So I'm going to click over and click and drag all my yellow data, P3 to P3. If I click back in my toolbar here, it kind of reminds me of the context array. I just picked my data. The next syntax is comma. Now it wants to know classes. So when it says classes, what it's talking about is these bins we just set up. So I'm going to highlight my bins, close my parentheses, hit enter, and this actual whole thing autofills based off just that formula that I put in X3 here. It fills what's called an array, a table of data. And so here what we have now is what this is doing is it's looking at this bin value I gave and it's finding everything that is less than that but more than the prior value. So for instance, there's nothing less than negative 1.55, which obviously there's no such thing as negative 2 yellow M&Ms. According to this, there were no packs that had fewer than 0.3 M&Ms that were yellow. So that would be 0. And to quickly look through the data, that looks right. There were no packs with 0 yellow M&Ms. Every pack had at least, 3, 3, 5, 3, 9. That was a big one. 3, 3, 3, 6, 4, 4, 6, 3, 2, 3, 2, 4. So just looking at our data, I can see the fewest M&Ms were 2. 2 packs had 2. And in fact, that's what this next bin is showing me, is that there were 2 packs that had fewer than 2.15. That's the 2 we just saw. Now, because this is a whole number, this 4 is looking at 3s and 4s. Then there's one that was between the 5.85 and 4, 2 between 5.85 and 7.7, and then one between 7.7 and 955. That's what these frequencies mean, which is great because that allows us to actually create a histogram out of this data. So I can click and drag this, and I can ignore that trailing 0. Now, if I had any extreme outliers with more than 9.55, those would be counted there. But that would be, outside of 3 standard deviations, we're talking like less than 0.5% of the time. So I click Insert Chart. And now the default it's going to do is a column chart, and that's actually what we want here. And I'm going to click and drag this, and I'm going to, just for reference, I'm going to click and drag it all the way over to that first histogram we made, just so we can talk a little about why this is, I think, a little more useful, is in this frequency versus bin, as they're calling it, and we're going to change the title in a second, we can see, and I'll kind of draw here a little bit, this right here, this 4 is our mean. Actually, they do it backwards from the way we would. So here is the 4, which is the mean. And then, 1 standard deviation is sort of represented like this. So the 2.5 is the first standard deviation, and the 5.85 is on the other side. Here, let's say blue, maybe. And then 2 standard deviations away, etc. So as you would kind of expect, most of our data falls within that first standard deviation. A lot of it was in that 2.15 to 4 bin. We had lots of 3s and 4s. And then on the other side of 4, there was actually not that many from 4 to 5.85. But I guess that would only be 5. So there's only one with exactly 5 M&Ms. And then there were, a couple bags with 6 or 7, a couple bags with 2. There's only one bag with a lot. And so we can kind of see, even though this is very rough data, the beginning of this normal distribution we would expect, at our X bar or our mean, and each standard deviation away. So those are 1S away, this would be 2S away, etc. And so that's why I think this is a lot nicer way to set it up than Sheets' default way. Because the default way, they're like, oh yeah, there's a lot that are 2 or 3, which is true, but I think it doesn't show us the way the data is really distributed exactly as well. A few things we want to do just to kind of clean this up is, frequency versus bin. If someone were just looking at this chart, they're like, frequency versus bin, what is that? So I closed my window over here. If I want to bring it back up, I can just double click. There's other ways you can bring it back, but I like to double click. And so I like to go over here to the chart editor, customize. And so for instance, chart and axis titles, frequency versus bin. We might say like frequency of yellow M&Ms. And that's for the chart title. And then for maybe the horizontal axis title, instead of bin, I might say like count of yellow M and M's. Because so hopefully now, and there's a lot of things you could do to the chart. I don't want to do too much, and this video is already getting kind of long. But hopefully now someone's going to look at this chart and they're going to know, okay, this is a count of yellow M&Ms, oh, 4, and then the frequency, oh, there's a lot in this 4 range. And hopefully it starts to make a little more sense. And there you go. That is what I think is the best way to make a histogram, looking at the standard deviation and the mean as our actual bin values on Google Sheets.